Hello, my name is Father Bill Moisant. I'm pastor here at Resurrection Catholic Parish in Tualatin, Oregon. Today we will spend a few minutes reflecting upon a document issued by the U.S. bishops in 1992 called Stewardship, a grateful response to God's love. In that document, the bishops are calling us to action, calling us to not be focused just within ourselves in terms of having holy thoughts or just saying our prayers inside our bodies and our minds and our religiosity being internal. The bishops are calling us to go out of ourselves, not to be shy, not to hold back, but to be the dynamic kind of Christian that Jesus calls us to be. Maybe innately, many of us might tend to shy away, especially from strangers. And so the first pillar of stewardship that the bishops promulgate is the pillar of hospitality. It is being open to the stranger. It's being open to people who aren't like us, people whom we don't know. We've never met them before. Or maybe they're a different race than we are. They're a different language, different ethnicity. We don't know anything about them. And so as human beings, we tend to be tribal. We tend to just hang with our own. But the bishops are calling us not to be like that. As disciples of Jesus Christ, we're called to be open to the strangers that we meet, be open to the people we don't know, and to take the initiative, not just to wait for them to approach us, but we approach them as disciples of Jesus Christ. Many years ago, I spent a year down at the downtown chapel on Burnside. And while I was down there and when I was in the seminary, I met a man who lived on the streets. His name was John. And I got to know John. He would come into the center, into the day room, and we'd feed him lunch and make sure they had clean clothes and help him as he survived on the streets. John and I would have conversations, and he would tell me what it was like for him to live on the streets. And he said one of the most difficult aspects of living on the street is that people don't speak to him. People ignore him. People will walk by him when he's sitting on the sidewalk. They don't even look at him. They don't even recognize his presence. He says, that hurts me a lot. Hurts me a lot because I feel demeaned. I feel worthless. I have enough problems as it is. The way they treat me makes me feel really bad. And so that always impressed me that we're really called as Christians to take the initiative, to reach out to the people that seem different than us, and to live out the gospel in a very intentional way. To take the initiative on that, not to wait for them to make the first move, but we make the first move, is something that we have practiced here for many years at Resurrection Parish. One of the comments that people come that visit here is that the congregation is so welcoming. The one lady told me by the time she got to her pew, 7 people had said hello to her. One even hugged her. She was shocked by that. But that's what it means to live out hospitality, to live out that first pillar of stewardship. The second pillar of stewardship that the bishops give us is prayer. Prayer comes from the living of hospitality. Because in being open to the people around us and opening our hearts to them, we open our hearts to God. And so in prayer then, we meet God in that space of openness, taking risks, being kind, being generous, being forgiving, being understanding, being compassionate. And so in that way then, our prayer life becomes very dynamic. It's just not routinely going through prayers that we've known since we were children. It's not just saying the rosary to ourselves, although saying the rosary is certainly a very wonderful devotion, but it's not just to do that. It's to say those prayers in a way that leads us to other people, that leads us back to the hospitality. And so those pillars go together, the two of them, hospitality and prayer, because the bishops are calling us to not live internally, but to live outside of ourselves, to go out and be dynamic Christians, and to live out the gospel each day of our lives. In the next reflection, we'll talk about the other two pillars of hospitality, which is formation and service. They also flow from these first two pillars of hospitality and prayer. And so as Christians then, we're called to listen to the bishop's call to be open to God's grace, be open to God's love and not be like the world. The world tends to build walls up. They acquire money and then they build up walls in order to separate themselves from other people. But God calls us not to be like that, but to be open, to be generous with people, to be trusting. We certainly need to keep ourselves safe and not put ourselves in dangerous situations, but normally we can go through our lives in a safe way, but to being open to people and be generous to them and not ignore them, not give someone an experience like John had down sitting on the sidewalk on Burnside, in which no one ever said hi to him, no one ever recognized his presence. So we're called to recognize the presence of everyone and take the initiative, because that's what Jesus calls us to do, because that's how Jesus is with us each day of our lives. Even though we're sinners, even though we don't do the things we should always do, or we don't follow through on the precepts of the Beatitudes or following the commandments, Jesus still loves us, and God reaches out to us and gives us gifts no matter what we do or who we are. And so we're called to be like that, to be generous of heart as we live out the gospel each day of our lives.